every time we do this, I wonder at why you are here this time. And the coffee is good, but I'm not sure that's a good enough reason alone. Okay, to the matter at hand. Next April 2026, we will mark 30 years of our new constitution. In truth, our first democratic constitution, and also, by the way, our first constitution that could be implemented by the courts, because we inherited in 1910 a very unfortunate British tradition of having no written constitution and a very limited capacity for the courts to fight with Parliament. We have a Bill of Rights, we have a 82-page constitution, and our court, as you will see every day, constantly fights with Parliament. This is a good time for citizens to reflect both on how well that document, the 1996 Constitution, has shaped our country, and also to remember the fears that we took with us on our route to buy baked beans from Spar and in the queue. And I want you to think back on what happened after you came back from the queue and we returned to our homes and obviously to our not yet transformed reality. It's also a good time to reflect, and I think the last time, Thorsten, that Gillian and I were here was here to talk to you about the prospect, which seemed dim, of coalition politics. But the reality is, last year, for the first time since 1994, and for the second time since 1948, no party got a majority of votes and seats in the national election. And this has created a context in which citizens have to think not only who should govern, I'm this and I'm that, but how should we be governed? What should be the content of that contract between citizens and their government? Last year, former President Mbeki and our current President Cyril Ramaphosa endorsed a call for a citizen-led, this is important language, citizen-led national dialogue to help reset, that's an important word, the next 30 years of our democracy. For Gillian and I, 30 years is a bold forward look, but we're delighted to embrace it because we have children and grandchildren. And so it's not a meaningless number. Now, the president, in his wisdom, and I have no idea how he put this list together, selected 32 people to guide, champion, and ensure the integrity and inclusivity of this process. It's a long list to take in, and I've just got copies of actually, which you are very much welcome to take away from. I think it truly is a very diverse list. It's got a name that I didn't really ever aspire to at all, not even on my tombstone, actually, of eminent. We delightfully have a friend who has converted it to imminent, and that sounds like a much better thing to be called. But I think, to be fair, what is true is that this group of people have some track record of engaging with their society in leadership ways, whether it's rugby, whether it's the wheelchaired tennis player who twice won the doubles at Wimbledon, whether it's Ginga, and I don't get that right, Clarke, who has spent her entire life keeping alive a tradition of storytelling in vernacular languages. And we can go back to our 30s, I think, when we first heard her, I think in the zoo, in the elephant park at the zoo, telling vernacular stories, whether it's John Carney. Okay, so it's that's the list. The dialogue was launched at a large meeting in Pretoria on the 15th and 16th of August. There was some controversy about the launch, and some people decided to stay away. A steering committee to Beyond the Eminent Persons Group to help guide this process, representing various sectors and being nominated and elected by those sectors, is in the process of being established. The ideal was that it would all happen on the 15th and 16th of August. Didn't quite work out that way. South Africans are a kind of rowdy bunch of people that don't like to be told what to do. And it's a rather elaborate process of meetings taking place in 38 sectors, actually, all over South Africa, to find somebody to represent them on the steering committee. A secretariat to actually make this thing happen is being housed in NEDLAC, that's the National Economic Development and Labour Advisory Council. A very interesting institution, also dating from 1996. I don't know of another country in the world which has institutionalized the right of citizens to engage with each other and make agreements in parallel to Parliament. And there's an interesting, and I think probably quite healthy tension between the two. The dialogue has a massively ambitious roadmap. I'm not going to put up this on the slide because I want to wait and see how much of it can actually happen. But they want 50,000 individual dialogues, 13,400 ward meetings. They want 5 million South Africans to be drawn into what needs to be fixed and how do we fix it. Now, I'm since being inaugurated on the 11th of July at the Union Buildings, I'm become deeply aware of two major negative reactions to the social dialogue. And they're really captured in two very powerful words. The first negative reaction is captured by the word despair. Despair. This sense that ever since we went home in 1994 and didn't have to open our baked beans, that from that moment, the trajectory of our nation has been uniformly and emphatically negative. To use appropriate biblical language, it's all gone to hell. That is the sentiment. Okay. Former President Mbeki, in the speech that he made calling for this dialogue in April of last year, indicated this was not actually an accurate count of our 30-year journey. And he noted the very substantial progress. If we could move to the next slide. The period from 1994 to 2007 was one which saw very substantial economic progress in South Africa. It saw strong growth rates, perfectly healthy growth rates actually. It saw improving GDP per capita. It saw a growing number of people at work and a diminishing number of people unemployed. It actually saw the reduction of poverty. And in many ways, many of these trends continued until 2013. And so the response I want to offer you to the word despair is a question. Why should the next 13 years not be more like the first 13 years? Why do they have to be like the second 13 years? You know, there were a few international events. The global financial crash in 2007, 2008. There was COVID. However, domestically, and believe me, I was present at one of them, vital national institutions were stolen. Eskom, Transnet, SARS, the National Prosecuting Authority. Okay. So there are, in the second half of our story, many self-inflicted wounds. And it's a choice that we and those who govern us make as to whether we go for the first half of the story or the second half. Now, the second negative emotion, gesindheid, I wish there was a better English word for gesindheid, actually, is a very deep skepticism. Yeah, Bobby, it's a very nice idea, but it's just going to be a talk shop and nothing is going to change. That's the emotion. Thorsten, it's not true that talking never changes things. Here's a list. The VM Commission was in 1979. It actually forced, by the way, the VM Commission existed because black workers went on strike. If anything was citizen-led, by the way, it's the VM Commission. Because when you have 100,000 people on strike in Durban, I was living there at the time, you have a choice of putting them in jail, which is not very helpful to Coronation and Lion Match, which were the companies where they were striking. Or you have to say, we've got to find a way of incorporating them in the decision-making process for labor relations. And that is what VHAN did. The National Peace Accord, this amazing document that was cobbled together by a small group of people in 6 months from April 1993. Please think back to how you felt about yourself in the country in April 1993 to September 1993. And then the peace movement, which again was citizen power, peace committees set up in villages and towns and cities all over South Africa. You'll recall a peace day when we all stood in the street at midday. You'll recall the police and the army and the peace committees separating ANC and Inkatha marches in townships. National Minimum Wage Act raised the wages of 5 million people significantly. And if you look at what that wage is, I think currently 4,500 rands a month. Think about where the wages were before. That's what it is now. It's been around for a few years. It's true, however, it's important to remain true to your own experience that sometimes talking doesn't change things. I was part of a national development plan. It's the first long-term plan South Africa's ever had. I think it's a pretty good document, not perfect, not comprehensive, 484 pages, 181 actionable items. I shudder to tell you how many of the actionable items have been actioned. It's been ignored. So it's not given that good ideas change society. That's the central challenge. And this is my two concluding points. The central challenge for South Africans, not eminent or imminent or around, is to find a way of bringing citizen power, without which nothing will change, into constructive engagement with the institutions, economic, media, social, religious, and political, who govern our existence. So we need a dialogue. It's just happened in Madagascar, led by pirates. When you start seeing pirate hats appear on the streets of South Africa, get excited. Maybe you even want to get a pirate hat worldwide, and incidentally led by a anime series called
Peace.
One Piece, filmed in the IDC-funded film center in Cape Town. It's got an underwater thing on the way to cinema. Worldwide, Japanese, and in Morocco, and in Kenya, and in Madagascar, and in Nepal. In Nepal, they've unearthed. They put rid of governments. Madagascar, the president ordered the army to shoot. The army said we'd rather be on the other side, and the president is in a safe place. We think to buy. So that's where we go from now. And now I want to end, oddly for me, on a gloomy note. Yesterday, well, in the past few days, there have been some very tragic events at Fort Hare University. Angry students not wearing pirate hats. I wish they had. Burning down buildings at Fort Hare. And so I want to end with words of somebody I don't know at all. I'm admiring of his words, and I shall look out for his work. His name is Selo Hatang. His designation is Director of Oxyon People Solutions, an organization I have not heard. But listen to the words. What keeps me awake, says Mr. Hatang, is the fear that these fires, if left unexplained and unaddressed, will one day burn us all. We risk becoming a nation that normatizes flames as a response until eventually there's nothing left to burn but hope itself. A country that speaks too often through fire eventually finds itself gathering and seeking only the ashes. And yet, he says, thank goodness, I refuse to believe that this is where the story ends. South Africa has risen from worse. Let this moment be more than any other. Let this moment be more than another entry in the archives of destruction. Fort Hare must rise again, not only in bricks, but also in spirits. Thank you.
Bobby's talked about the social dialogue from the top, which is his perspective. I want to talk about social dialogue from the grassroots. The list Bobby put up of our previous social dialogues, and we should take courage from this list. We are a nation who likes to talk, and this is not a bad thing. Talking is better than burning. But it's been mainly a group at the top. The one exception was the National Peace Accord, and there the group at the top put together a very detailed, I think 40-page document that was the Peace Accord, and then the people took it. And it's worth Googling this and seeing how it worked, because there were peace monitors out there. It was a very violent time. It's no good, Bobby, saying to all these people, remember, some of them are too young to remember that, but it was a very violent time. And these peace monitors armed themselves with bed sheets torn into strips with the word observer written on them. Some of the luckier ones also had a small orange flag on a pole. And they went out into the violence, and they said to this armed group, go that way, and the other armed group, go that way, so that they wouldn't converge and fight. And the people we may not forget are the people in the armed groups who did what they were asked. This person standing there with a bedsheet and a flag asked them to behave in a certain way, and they did. Not because they'd read and internalized the 40-page peace accord, but because they wanted peace. They really wanted peace, and so they cooperated with the peace monitors. And I think my question to us really as South Africans is, do we want the dialogue or don't we? Because if we want the dialogue, what I'm going to talk about is how we as individuals, as Christians, can do it. If we want the dialogue, the invitation is there. But if the dialogue fails, that's on us. How and why should we do this? Well, let's start with the fact that we're South Africans. And I know a lot of us looked at the founding convention of the national dialogue, and the word that came to mind was chaos. So what? We're South Africans. We can live with chaos. People of my age who drive in Johannesburg never have to do Sudoku. We adopt the driving style known as pot swerving. We avoid the potholes. We cope with the dead robots. We telepathically understand what the drivers around us want to do because the indicators don't always tell us what is going to happen next. And then we go home and we don't have to do Sudoku because we have made 15 new brain connections and all those cells are functioning very well indeed. Some of us remember the chaos of an armed vehicle driving through plate glass windows at the Cadessa negotiation. That was a time of fear, of anger, and of chaos. And what fruit did it bear? Our beautiful Constitution. It's not just that we can live with chaos, it's that we know how to make chaos very productive. I heartily recommend this book called The Chaos Precinct. It's written about Jeppe Street, which is also known as Little Addis, Little Ethiopia. And there, all our economic goals are being met. Entrepreneurship comes up through the cracks in the pavement. Cross-border trade happens all the time with bulk consignments going on long-distance taxis and buses to the rest of Africa. One mall in that area, and there are many malls, believe it or not, one mall has a greater economic turnover than Sandton City. But do we applaud? We do not. It doesn't look like what we mean by a thriving entrepreneurial economy. It doesn't sound like what we mean by international trade. And the dialogue, I believe, offers us the opportunity of seeing things differently so that we can recognize what is working. And in particular, because it is a dialogue, we can hear different people differently. Because a dialogue, if it's going to work, has to be mainly about listening. Yes, I know what we want to do is put together a list of our grievances and pass them up the line to government. There's nothing they haven't heard before. There's nothing they don't know, but we have the opportunity to listen in a particular way. We have the invitation, not to listen as we so often do, arranging the arguments in our head so the moment the person pauses to draw breath, we can jump in and tell them they're wrong. There are different ways of listening, all with different labels. Appreciative listening, empathetic listening. The Catholics talk about contemplative listening or synodal listening. My favorite definition comes from a Sikh activist in the United States called Valerie Kaur.
Right.
She talks about listening with curiosity.
Sure.
Listen, says Valerie, curious to know what part of yourself you discover in this person that you're hearing. Because dialogue listening asks a lot of us. It's not just to listen to the people who agree with us, who sound like us. It's to listen with curiosity to people whose views we really, really, really don't want to hear. And curiosity, by the way, switches on your prefrontal cortex. You then operate at a higher level when you are curious, which causes me to say, this is what we were made for. We were created in order to listen with curiosity. Hope also switches on the prefrontal cortex, but that's a story for another day. Now, why should we as Christians listen with curiosity to everybody else? Because one of the foundations of our faith is that everybody has been created in the image of God. There's no lesser God somewhere in whose image some people were created. Everybody was created in the image of God. And if we don't listen to them, we miss out on that specific and particular facet of God's beauty that only they are carrying. And also, we as Christians have some commandments to contend with. We are told to love our neighbor. Now, I'm always nervous about quoting scripture here, TGIF, where there are people who know so very much more than I do. But if I've got it right, in the 26 chapters of the book of Leviticus, there are 36 injunctions to love our neighbor. It goes beyond that, to love the stranger within the gate, gerim in Hebrew, and even beyond that, to love our enemy. Okay, you might be saying this all very well, but A, it can't be done, and B, what on earth does it have to do with the national dialogue? I want to suggest to you that if it's too hard to love our neighbor and our enemy, we might start by listening to them. Just listening to them with curiosity. In order to do what? Well, in order to build a very particular kind of community. Martin Luther King called it beloved community, where oppressor and oppressed sit down together around the same table. My favorite definition at the moment, it changes, is Walter Brueggemann talking about shalom. Yeah. Because shalom insists that everybody needs to be part of it. We can't have our own little shalom with the people who believe what we do, with the people who look as we look, with the people who sound as we sound. Shalom has to be for everyone. And Brueggemann does a hard thing. He presents us with Jeremiah's letter to the exiles in Babylon, where the exiles might have expected their prophet to tell them that they were wonderful and their oppressors were terrible and one day everything would be all right. But that's not what Jeremiah did. Jeremiah told them that they had to find shalom with Babylon, within the very hard times they were experiencing as exiles and together with the Babylonians. And I'm going to read a page because Brueggemann says it so much better than I can. But seek the shalom of the city, says Jeremiah, where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its shalom you will find your own shalom. And that is Brueggemann's translation. Imagine that. A letter written to displaced persons in hated Babylon, where they have gone against their will and watched their life and culture collapse. And they are still there, yearning to go home, despising their captors and resenting their God, if indeed God is still their God. And the speaker for the vision dares to say, your shalom will be found in Babylon's shalom. The well-being of the chosen ones is tied to the well-being of that hated metropolis, which the chosen people fear and resent. It is profound and disturbing to discover that this remarkable religious vision will have to be actualized in the civil community. The stuff of well-being is the sordid collection of rulers, soldiers, wardens, and carpetbaggers in Judah and every place of displaced, exhausted hope. It is an incredible vision even now for people of faith who feel pressed and angry about the urban shape of our existence, to say nothing about the urban shape of our vision. But again, it is affirmed that God's shalom is known only by those in inclusive, caring community. The letter of Jeremiah to the displaced person surely did not meet expectations. No doubt they hoped for a purer gospel, a neater promise, a distinctive future. But God's exiles are always learning the hard way that the thrust toward viable unity must find a way to include the very ones we prefer to exclude. Depending on how deep the hatred and how great the fear, this promise of shalom with hated Babylon is a glorious promise or a sobering thought, but it is our best vision, a vision always rooted in and addressed to historical realities. So, what does the dialogue offer us as grassroots, as ordinary people? First of all, if we say yes, a feast of listening. Second, a space to imagine our country again, to imagine how, with all our resources, all the things we know and love, we could be. And this is not something to imagine on our own. It's something to imagine in community where we share our hopes. We all have hopes and fears, but the choice is, what are we going to share? Our fears or our hopes? And there are consequences to what you choose to fear. We know that the human brain is Teflon for good news and Velcro for bad news. So we have to share a lot of good news if any of it at all is going to stick in our brain. So we have this window to imagine something better, something for all of us, something of a country that we understand better because we have been listening so carefully to those we would prefer to exclude.
Thank you so much. And you've left a lot of time for questions and comments. It's always the question comes from the back of the room, with apologies to Zoom. Rory, speak loud.
Me, because I was late. Thank you, Bobby and Gillian. I just wanted to make 2 comments and then 1 observation. So, Bobby, Sela Hatang, who you quoted, interestingly, was the former CEO of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, and then that I think that's just by the by.
Thank you.
But the founder of that foundation, Madiba himself, said, to your point, Gillian, said many things. But one of the quotes that I've always taken to heart, he says, better to sit down and talk to your enemy than to fight with them. I mean, we know how that resonates still today. And it just strikes me too that to the point of South Africans love to talk, well, isn't that how Jesus taught? Because he taught in parables, but it was always in a kind of, yes, there was the Sermon on the Mount, and he stood on a boat, but otherwise he was in close communion with his chosen group, and that's how he communicated. So it just resonated. So thank you. Yeah.
There's that quote always in Tony the Earth book, that's war is joy is better than war, and I think that's from in Winston Churchill's peace minister or something. So I love that line.
There you go.
And if I may just respond to that, Desmond Tutu said, and it's in a stained glass window in St. George's Cathedral, if you want peace, don't talk to your friends, talk to your enemies.
So, can I ask hopefully it's not a hard question. Are there people in whose interest it would be for the national dialogue to fail? And how would we negotiate that?
Yeah, responding to the point that you've made, and thank you for reminding me that I thought the name of Selo Anteng was familiar. This group of eminent persons, maybe whether it's eminent or not, we've certainly been active. I think this week we will be having our 27th meeting. since the 11th of July when we were inaugurated. And we see as one of our major purposes to widen the net and to draw in people who, for a variety of reasons, were not present on the 15th and 16th of August. And that means talking to MK, it means talking to EFF, it means talking to the parliamentary. We're trying to do, Madagascar is a nice, simple story. The students went on the street because of student debt, by the way. Student debt is behind Fort Hare. Student debt has caused buildings to be burnt down in the University of the Free State recently. So the students go out on the street, mainly about debt. They get violent. The president says shoot. The army says we're not going to shoot. The army joins them. Now comes the interesting moment. What happens next? They now have a military dictator. By the way, the person who is in Dubai was twice installed in Madagascar by a military coup. So you live by the sword. But the trick here is to find a way of talking that changes the order. Let me give you an anecdote that illustrates a very personal anecdote, but parables, and that's what anecdotes are very powerful. When the Chamber of Mines decided to start negotiating with the National Union of Mine Workers, it was set up in December 1982. In 1983, the Chamber of Mines, because it saw itself as a very progressive organization, decided they would start negotiating in July of 1983. What they quickly discovered is that NUM was a different kind of union. The negotiating room at the Chamber of Mines was on the 7th floor and could accommodate about 50 people. NUM arrived with 200 people in their delegation, so they had they had a problem about accommodating. But here's the anecdote. The ritual at the Chamber of Mines is that waiters with white gloves would arrive with a tea tray and for a chamber meeting, and they would be trained to recognize the most powerful person in the room and to serve him first. I had the portfolio of negotiating for the chamber. I was the most powerful person of the room. Cyril Ramaphosa was leading the delegation. I said to the white-gloved fellow, serve him first. Okay, the act was instinctive. I think it was a good act, by the way. But, that is the dynamic that we have to change. The University of the Free State has now got an agreement about dealing with student debt. Right? And I'm hoping that can be transformed into one of the ways all universities deal with student debt, which never should have been advanced, incidentally, by either NSFAS or the banks. We have a law that says it's immoral to lend people more than they can repay. That's the National Credit Act. And if we can find a way of writing off student debt, because that's actually what the auditors do at universities, then we can find a way of creating a new order. So it's the two things. I don't think there's a desire for the dialogue to fail. There's an expectation for the dialogue to fail. That's different. And be careful what you wish for. And if you have given up on your country and given up on your capacity to improve your country, then your country will carry on going downhill. That's the underlying choice that we need to make, and that Gillian was also talking to.
Oh,
Thank you very much. I was at the dialogue and I found it amazing, not chaos or amazing in the chaos. I had goosebumps, spiritual experience. And I'm on one of the sectoral groups choosing so I'm very committed. I'm with you. I think we can pause with more seriousness about people that is against the dialogue. Not like me, I'm in it and I'm going to stay in it. But the distrust and the voices that I hear that's arguing with me, they're saying or asking, they're for dialogue and all the beautiful things they say.
Yes.
They say this is just not it, because by going there, Schalk is endorsing a mafia state. We were there, Ramaphosa was there, Mashatile was there, people were making fun of them for corruption and saying corruption had left the room, corruption is back, and clapping hands. Don't call me comrades, I'm not part of that. So isn't there also a civil revolt that's actually caring about the country? I think in the last 2 days, Mbeki called for it, said that was not the dialogue. That is Ramaphosa's PR. We are still waiting for the dialogue. Now, if there's another one, I'll go to that one as well, because I believe in talking.
Yes.
But I'm just more critically, is there's not a fake PR ANC dialogue? And I know Rolf invited Flip Base personally and what. So is there not something legitimate about the civic revolt because of the mafia state we're following now daily about the 2 commissions?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I hope you hear my heart and then my skepticism, because that's part of talking. Isn't this one the fake one?
Yeah. I hope I hear both your heart and your head. So just deal with the head first. Between 1990 and 1994, okay, South Africa had a Prague Spring. The Afrikaner nationalists realized their time was up. They were busy burning their papers in their offices. Okay. The ANC in exile was busy booking flights to return to South Africa, coming back, trying to work out who actually was the ANC. It was only a faction that left, and after they dealt with the trade unions. So we had no government. We had forums. We had a thing called the National Economic Forum. We had an education forum. The forums came from the bottom up. They just were created. They weren't appointed by the president. They weren't eminent. They were imminent. And a lot of progress was made in those forums. It's difficult to have a people's revolution in a constitutional democracy. That's the head, and that's something that we've got to think through. It's not impossible, by the way, at all. The national minimum wage was negotiated in NEDLAC and endorsed in Parliament. So it's possible to have, and Vihan is another example. The Peace Committee is a thing of the bubbling up. We had peace because in their hearts, people wanted peace. We had peace because the police and the army didn't want to shoot. So, right now, what I'm hoping for, and that's why we're doing, Gillian and I are doing what we're doing. I mean, we spoke at a Dutch Reformed church on Sunday. I can't imagine a Christian community that doesn't want to embrace shalom and the South African shalom, which is the national dialogue, at least for one instance of it. Not the only instance. So I can't imagine a Christian community that can't, for the next 6 to 9 months, reimagine their future. And I promise you, if they can identify a set of hopes and a set of ideas about how to change things, some of it is very concrete. At municipal elections, half of the seats are wards and half of the seats are PR. At province and national, it's all PR. So the temptation to confuse party with country is built into our constitution. It can be changed. It's actually a law. It can be changed by Parliament. So, the 2 things is, I hope people will seize the initiative and hold the meetings. They don't need anybody's permission to do so. Then they need to make their voices heard. And where there are sectoral bodies, you can go there. And then they can say, this is what we want to be as part of the social compact, which is the envisaged end state. I hope actually that we'll end up with lots of social compacts, and we won't have to wait for one big event at UNISA or anywhere else. So this is the moment to get the head and the heart together of 62 million South Africans.
I just want to say how fantastic that Scott went to the convention and is part of the sectoral committee, because any churches that are inspired to have their own meetings, to share their hopes, to spend time. I suspect it's something that can't be done in an afternoon. To spend time working out what they want to happen next. Schalk is the person who can funnel this into the right spot in the National Convention. So that was very good news to hear. And thank you, Schalk.
You're kind of half answering a question on Zoom, which says, is it perhaps better to have a conversation than dialogue? Dialogue at the national level often comes with rules, regulations, time restrictions, whereas having conversation is a daily occurrence. You kind of answered that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, okay. 1, 2.
I really appreciate the fact that the aim is to reach as many people as possible,
Yeah.
which I think is great. But we're 67 million people, and we are 67 million people that are incredibly diverse. We have
Yes.
from highly educated to people who can't spell their own name, from
Yes.
very rich to so poor that they die of malnutrition,
Yes.
from highly connected to not connected at all. And so I'm just putting it out there. How does one reach the people that are normally on the margins? So, for example, the rural people in the Eastern Cape.
Yes.
How does one reach them? Because the Eastern Cape's in for trouble now, right? With all the
Yes.
disinvestment. The Eastern Cape's going to really go through hell now,
Yes.
with all the losses of jobs and so on. How does one reach rural Limpopo? How does one reach Mpumalanga, which has so many problems with the Zamazamas and with all sorts of shenanigans going on? Because I mean, it's all very well for us who are well connected and good at speaking English and so on to be talking. It's great, it's necessary. But how does, and it's just a question, I don't have an answer. How does one include those marginalized communities?
I mean, let me offer you 2 quick answers. I think with great difficulty what I would point out is that amongst the list of 32 eminent people are 2 traditional leaders and the 2 archbishops of the Zion Christian Church. So that's 4. Okay. And I'll tell you what's delightful is that one of the Amakosi, a very powerful lady, that's already happening. People are not waiting for buses or invitations or food or t-shirts.
Yeah.
They're just happening. So she is receiving reports. This particular community, because of course, you know, a traditional area or tribal area is not homogeneous. Nothing in life is homogeneous. Okay, but we met and we discussed, and these are our problems. Okay? That's coming in, and you know, part of the EPG's job is to make sure that the voice is heard. You know, the other really important thing is people mustn't wait for this process. They really mustn't. They must say, we as citizens have a right to reimagine our country, and we're going to do this. And you know, if we have to find pirate hats, we'll do it. Okay, but you know what we want is the space for people to meet, and then the capacity for people to be heard by the powerful. The issue of language and the issue of online have been debated, I think, at every one of our 26 meetings, and it's difficult. I had to learn that I thought very few South Africans have smartphones. Our stats said over 80% have smartphones. So it's not just a question of online or not online. It's making online work for people who don't live in Rosebank. So, you know, there are subtleties here. Again, we have Nombelisa Gaza, who's done a huge amount of work in rural communities. We have Gillian in Sloppy, looking at how language can become an enabler rather than a barrier. But, you know, the main thing I want to say is don't rely on any of these structures. Just do it for yourself.
Listen.
So also likewise, thank you very much. I want to come back to a few things. And one is just how do we shift the expectation that government is the solution? And I'm meaning at every level. And I love, Gillian, the fact that you spoke about the kind of from the grassroots up. Because so much of what I've read is what Scalp was talking about, the sort of the cynicism of who's going to, you know, the expectation of delivery and who will deliver. So I'm wondering just how one shifts that. And Robbie, you've spoken about social compacts. How do we funnel that vision and consolidate it into social compacts? And then if I may, just one other point, I'd invited a group that have been looking at how to ensure a trauma-informed approach into the dialogues. And I'm wondering, so what I'm hearing is that there will be dialogues at multiple levels.
Yeah.
And what are the skills that are needed to sort of address the trauma that still sits at so many levels in our country?
The very first, very tentative, but it is still imminent, meeting that Bobby and I held was at St. Paul's Church at Parkhurst, the little Anglican church there. And the first person to get up spoke about trauma. It is very much at the forefront of everybody's consciousness. A couple of nights ago, a new clinic was launched by the psychoanalysts. It needs to be done in groups. We need to face the fact that trauma is incredibly present and incredibly shaping. We can't put everybody into counseling, but there are moves afoot. Some of the foundations, the legacy foundations, are working to provide trauma. So it is absolutely part of the consciousness of the dialogue working out at grassroots and part of a much wider consciousness beyond dialogue. Will it work? I don't know. We're dealing with intergenerational trauma, but at least it's there, and people are saying, wow, if we're going to have conversations or dialogue, we do need to deal with this.
I just want to echo when we were at Andy Berg on Sunday. Gillian made use of the very powerful Afrikaans idiom, ons wag op die kaptein. And if there's one message I'd love you to take away is please don't wag op die kaptein. Because this kaptein is bureaucratic and slow and imperfect. And, you know, very much busy with an agenda of trying to fix what went wrong in the second half of our 30 years. So, you know, no conversation between adult South Africans could not involve trauma and guilt in some way or another. And we have to find the resources. And I mean, Schalk has been doing this with this talk. Maybe we need the songs along with the pirates' hats to exorcise the demons. But, you know, Marcia says, yes, it should be on our agenda, and it is. And we will make some contribution. But, you know, the formal processes are 10% of the story. 90% of the story is what's in the heads and hearts of 60 million South Africans.
And just to say very quickly, what Schalk is doing with the Betereinders, that ongoing conversation, if you're not part of the conversation, you can catch the podcasts. If we could replicate that 100,000 times, we would be in such a good position.
And again, one last continuation, I mean, this eminent persons group for me has been an absolute and remarkable blessing. These are 32 very exceptional persons. I don't care what title. We were having a discussion about how good or bad the inaugural conference was. One of the observations was, where were the whites? Another was, there were too many young people and they were very rude. Yeah, this is the warp and woof of a society seeing itself honestly and wanting, and you know, if there's one thing the 32 people share in common, it's a sense of despair, what has happened, and the belief that it can be fixed. And there's a third thing. They want to unite the wealth, experience, and power and capacity of white South Africans with the patriotism and forgiveness of black South Africans. Huh? That's the value that is out there. That's the prize that actually is available. If you're white, my goodness, this is manna from heaven, I would have thought. So, you know, I'm hugely encouraged by the values. Whether all of the great rollout things will happen on time and in the right order, I'd much rather rely on the peace process, which is something people took to the streets. They made their own jackets. They didn't get paid. They took their own risks with their own lives. That if we can have that and these values, then we can really fix this. This can become. I want Peyton's book to be republished with a new title. Nevertheless, the beloved country.
Right. Some French political philosopher forgot the name. The most perilous time is when a government seeks redress.
Yes.
For a grievance so long endured soon becomes intolerable once the possibility of its removal crosses men's minds. I guess I wonder if the grievances of people have become intolerable and governments cannot find redress until grievances are removed. The key word here being removed, right? Not just heard. So, you know, there's a before the dialogue, after the dialogue, maybe that's a part of it, but just this, you know, government has a credibility problem thing. Do you want to, I mean, you've kind of again half
I'm
answered
familiar
that.
with the quote. I also can't
Yeah.
remember the name, but yes, when you start on a reform path, as Mr. Gorbachev found, and as F.W. de Klerk found, you're likely to end in Dubai if you're lucky. So that's true. I just want to add, please let's not stop reforming. It's at a risk we have to take, but we shouldn't be too worried about songs and fists. What we need is the robustness of our institutions to turn the anger into new order. That's the challenge that faces. And to be fair, you know, there's on my list, I left off a thing that's really important. South Africans must look at a thing called Operation Vuleka, dreamt up by the Treasury and funded by the Treasury. And the Treasury just said, unless you guys do the following things, you're not going to get your share of the tax revenue. That's what they did. And that is what has fixed Eskom and is fixing Transnet. And they're now trying to fix the municipalities. So, you know, it is possible for institutions to self-correct. That's the thought that I want to end with.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh, sorry. End with. I was promising one more.
Yeah,
Shall we make this the last?
So my question is one that's very practical. So we're talking about talking and getting involved in how.
Yes.
Where do we go from today? Where do I go from today? How do I get involved? What's
Yeah, I wish I had a better answer because we don't yet have a steering committee and we're months behind on that thing. And we don't yet have a fully functional secretariat. But what I would say to you and what I've said to others is if you have a community that is ready to embrace these ideas, have them meet and be very, you know, to just all the only thing that you have to take away from this idea is let them meet about hopes and solutions, not only about grievances and blame. Okay. And keep a record. You should, there are two records that you should keep. The one is a list of ID numbers. Okay. Just to say the meeting took place. I mean, it's a thing that we've applied to electing the steering committee. We've got to know who was in the room. Okay. And then keep a list of how to fix things, not attributed to anybody. If you get that and you give it to me, I promise you it will end up in the secretariat. I can't promise you that it will necessarily be heard. I mean, the really exciting thing, because it's probably more than one meeting, is for you to think about what would you like in a social compact that would address the things that are most burning and important to the group that has met. We need to start writing the social compact now. We mustn't, the convention was organized within a week. The invitations went out, and that was part of the chaos. We must shape the social compact right now. But there's nothing to stop you from doing it now.
There's no format to follow. It's
The format is to be as inclusive as possible, to be ready to listen. There's a plan to train 6,000 facilitators in dealing with trauma and how to run a good conversation. That hasn't happened. Don't wait for that. South Africa's a skill.
Right.
You know how to run a good conversation. Just do it.
Yeah.
We're nearly on 7:30, so I'm wondering whether we can. You guys have a few minutes, hey? So I mean, there's also something on Zoom still that I haven't got to yet, but I think we just need to give people the freedom to leave if they have to leave. Thank you so much again, Bobby and Gillian. Thank you so much for being game to do this. You've spoken regularly, probably yearly, or most years at TGIF, and we really, really appreciate you. Thank you very, very much.